The scream left Mara Vale's throat before her brain could stop it. 1 second, she was carrying a pot of burnt coffee across scuffed linoleum. The next, she was airborne, lungs burning, time fracturing, throwing herself between a gun barrel and a stranger with eyes like winter, for bullets punched through her back before she hit the ground. She did not know the man sitting in the corner booth, with silver hair and hands that never trembled. The one wearing a coat that probably cost more than her entire year's rent with a face too perfect to be real was Lucian Crowe, immortal sovereign of the city's underworld. The vampire king who controlled everything that moved after midnight. She only knew that someone was about to die, and her body moved before her mind could argue. By the time the sirens began wailing through the snow-heavy night, both the waitress and the vampire had vanished into the storm. This is not a fairy tale. This is a story of blood, magic, impossible choices, and 4 bullets that bound 2 fates together forever. Snow in this city doesn't cover the darkness. It only makes the edges sharper. Before we dive into Mara and Lucian's intense journey tonight, I need you to do something for me. Hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when an ordinary waitress saves a vampire king's life. And here's the thing, I read your comments, every single one. So, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what kind of stories get your heart racing. Dark romance, fantasy, forbidden love. Let me know, because tomorrow I'm bringing you another story that will absolutely consume you. And if you're someone who loves getting lost in tales of impossible choices and dangerous devotion, you're in the right place. Now, let's begin this story of 4 bullets and 1 fateful choice. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday, and Roussos, tucked on a nameless street where the good part of downtown bled into something raw, was nearly empty. The neon sign outside the windows sputtered between sickly yellow and dead grey, casting jittering shadows across the vinyl booths. The heating hadn't worked right in 3 years. The cold seeped through the walls like something alive. Mara Vale wiped down table 6 for what felt like the 100th time that shift. Her feet screamed inside boots held together with duct tape and prayer, the kind of pain that started sharp and went numb around hour 14. She'd been awake since 4:00 a.m., first the hospital sitting beside her father's empty bed, signing papers she didn't understand. Then the pharmacy, arguing over pills she couldn't afford. Now this, the graveyard shift because Rico's day guy had quit and someone had to cover. Her phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another automated message from the collections agency. Another number she couldn't answer. Medical debt didn't care that you were 26 and alone. It didn't care that you'd sold your car, your laptop, every piece of jewelry your mother left behind. It just kept growing. A monster that fed on exhaustion and desperation. Mara had $31 in her checking account. The funeral bill was $8,400. The hospital was asking for $47,700. And the apartment she'd grown up in, the one with her father's books still on the shelves, would be foreclosed in 42 days. She'd already worked every shift she could find. She'd already begged every friend who would still take her calls. She'd already Googled things she was ashamed to Google. And still, it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. She pressed her palms against the table until the cheap laminate bit into her skin. Pain was good. Pain meant she was still here, still moving, still fighting. Her eyes drifted across the restaurant. Old Terence was hunched in his usual spot by the register, muttering at his crossword puzzle and nursing decaf that had gone cold an hour ago. But it was the man in booth 12 who made the hair on Mara's neck stand up. He'd walked in maybe 30 minutes ago, right as the last couple was leaving. She'd been refilling the salt shakers and almost dropped one when the door opened. Not from the cold wind that rushed in, but from the way he moved. Too smooth, too controlled. Like gravity didn't apply to him the same way it applied to everyone else. He'd carried no umbrella despite the snow. His coat was dark grey, wool or maybe cashmere, the kind of fabric Mara had only ever seen on mannequins in store windows she'd never enter. It fit him like armor. Beneath it, a black shirt, no tie, simple but clearly expensive. On his wrist, a watch with no visible brand, which somehow made it more unsettling. He hadn't looked at the menu. He'd spoken 5 words in a voice that resonated in Mara's chest like a bass note. Coffee, black, nothing else. Then he'd walked straight to the farthest corner of the restaurant, the booth tucked against the back wall where he could see both exits and the kitchen door, where no one could sit behind him, where the flickering neon light couldn't quite reach. Mara had worked enough late shifts to recognize the behavior. This wasn't caution. This was survival instinct, the kind of awareness that came from knowing people wanted you dead. Now she stood behind the counter, stealing glances at him through her lashes as she pretended to organize receipts. His face was unsettling in its perfection, sharp cheekbones, a jaw that could cut glass, features arranged with an artist's precision. His hair was silver white, shoulder length, pulled back loosely in a way that should have looked careless but instead looked intentional, elegant. But his eyes, God, his eyes, even from across the room, even in the bad lighting, they were wrong. Too pale, too bright, the color of frost on steel, of winter moonlight on snow. When he glanced up from his phone, those eyes swept across the restaurant with a predator's awareness. He made Mara think of wolves, of storms, of things that belonged in dark forests and old stories, not diners that smelled like burnt hash browns and industrial cleaner. The coffee pot in her hand had gone lukewarm. She needed to do a refill round. It was literally her job. Tips were tips, and she couldn't afford to be precious about discomfort. But every survival instinct she'd honed growing up in this neighborhood was screaming at her to stay away from Booth 12. Still, Mara Vale had learned a long time ago that survival and rent money were often at odds. She drew a breath that tasted like old fryer oil and forced her feet to move. "Coffee?" she asked when she reached his table, proud that her voice only shook a little. Lucian Crowe didn't look up immediately. He finished reading whatever message had lit up his phone screen. Something about a shipment, a border, names Mara would never know. He locked the phone with a deliberate motion, and only then raised his gaze to meet hers. Those eyes hit her like cold water. She felt stripped, examined, catalogued. He looked at her the way someone might study a painting in a museum, with detached interest and absolutely no warmth. But then, something flickered in that frost-pale gaze. His eyes caught on the shadows, carved beneath her own eyes, the exhaustion written into every line of her face. For half a second, maybe less, Mara could have sworn she saw something almost human surface in his expression. Recognition, maybe, or pity. It vanished before she could be sure. "Yes," he said, just one word, but it landed like a command from something ancient and absolute. Mara poured carefully, hands steady despite the way her pulse was trying to climb out of her throat. Not a drop spilled. She'd learned that control working doubles when her hands shook from exhaustion. "Slow night," she offered, falling back on server autopilot. "Is it?" His voice carried an accent she couldn't place. European, maybe old. "Some nights are only quiet, until they're not." The words felt like a warning Mara didn't understand. She nodded, already backing away, already desperate to put distance between herself and whatever this man was. Mara didn't know she'd just spoken to the architect of a kingdom built on blood and shadows. She didn't know he'd spent the last hour deciding which of his rivals to eliminate before they could move against him. She didn't know that 3 floors beneath the city, in chambers older than the streets above them, an entire civilization bowed when he entered a room. To Mara, he was just another stranger with sad eyes hidden behind ice. Another customer she'd forget by morning, another reason she hated the shift. But fate doesn't care what you know. It doesn't wait for permission. Mara had barely taken 5 steps back toward the counter when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong, not the door opening, the door being kicked. She spun around, coffee pot still in hand, just in time to see the glass door explode inward. Snow and wind roared into the restaurant like something unleashed, sending napkins spiraling into the air and making the lights flicker wildly. 2 figures stood in the doorway. They wore long black coats that moved wrong, too heavy, too stiff. Their faces were hidden behind dark masks, not ski masks, something sleeker, more tactical, more final. They didn't scan for exits, didn't look for witnesses. They just stared straight at Booth 12, straight at the man with silver hair and winter eyes. And then Mara saw the guns. The air inside Russo's turned to concrete. Everything slowed, went crystalline and strange. Mara stood frozen in the middle of the narrow space between the shattered door and the corner booth. The coffee pot still clutched in her white-knuckled grip. Old Terence made a sound like a wounded animal and dove behind the counter, his crossword puzzle scattering across the floor. The man in booth 12 didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't even look surprised. He just watched the gunman with those pale, impossible eyes and waited. If Mara Vale had known what was about to happen in the next 3 seconds, she would have run. If she'd known who sat in that corner booth, she would have quit her shift and never looked back. If she'd known that 4 bullets and 1 scream would rewrite her entire existence, she might have made a different choice. But Mara didn't know any of that. All she knew was 3 things happened in the space between heartbeats. The gunmen raised their weapons, the waitress screamed, "Get down!" and Lucienne Crowe watched a mortal woman throw herself forward with a courage that made absolutely no sense. Her body collided with his just as the first shot cracked through the air. The impact was nothing. She weighed barely anything. But her momentum carried them both sideways out of the booth. Lucienne felt the bullets punch through her back with sickening precision. 1, 2, 3, 4. The scent of blood hit him immediately. Sharp, copper, human. But beneath it, something else. Something that burned. Silver. Mara Vale's body went limp against him, her weight suddenly complete, her breath leaving in a wet, rattling gasp. Blood spread across her uniform in blooming roses of red. Her eyes wide, shocked, confused, found his for one suspended moment. Then they rolled back. Lucienne moved. Not human speed, not human strength. The world became a blur of motion and shadow as he gathered her body against his chest and launched through the shattered door into the storm. Behind him, he heard the gunmen scrambling, shouting, trying to track what their human eyes couldn't follow. Too slow, too mortal, too late. Snow lashed against his face as he ran. Not ran. He flowed through alleys and across rooftops, moving between spaces like water through cracks. The city blurred past, fire escapes, brick walls, the distant glow of traffic lights bleeding into the darkness. Mara's blood soaked through his coat. Her heartbeat stuttered against his chest, irregular, weakening. A clock winding down. She was dying. Lucienne Crowe, who had watched empires rise and crumble, who had walked through the Black Death and the Blitz without flinching, who had ordered executions with less thought than most people gave to breakfast, felt something cold and unfamiliar twist in his chest. She didn't know. That was the part that wouldn't let him think clearly, the part that kept replaying in his mind like a broken record. She didn't know who he was, didn't know what he was, didn't know that assassins had been circling him for weeks, that the Bloodlord families were finally making their move, that tonight was supposed to be the night the Vampire King fell. She'd just seen a gun pointed at a stranger and moved. No calculation, no hesitation, just instinct. Pure, stupid, human instinct. Lucienne landed on a rooftop 3 miles from the restaurant and pulled out his phone with one hand, the other keeping pressure on Mara's wounds. His fingers came away slick with blood that shimmered wrong in the moonlight. Too bright, almost luminescent, enchanted silver. His jaw clenched. They hadn't just wanted to kill him. They'd wanted to make sure he stayed dead. Silver that had been blessed, cursed, alchemically altered to burn through supernatural flesh like acid. A single bullet would have crippled him for days, given his enemies time to take his head. But this mortal woman had taken all 4 instead. He dialed a number he hadn't used in decades. It rang once. "My king." The voice on the other end was smooth, ancient, cautious. "We heard about the Mercy Hospital private wing. 10 minutes. Prepare the theater." Lucien's voice was granite. "And send Victor. I need a blood mage. Now." A pause. "My lord, the Covenant forbids—" "I don't care what the Covenant forbids." Each word dropped like a stone. 10 minutes. Casimir. If she dies, everyone who delayed her survival dies with her. He ended the call. The woman in his arms, Mara, he'd heard the old man at the counter call her Mara, let out a sound that was barely a breath. Her lips had gone grey. Her skin felt cold even to him. 4 bullets of enchanted silver should have killed her instantly. The poison was designed to burn through supernatural healing, to overwhelm any magic that tried to intervene. On a human, it should have been like injecting liquid fire directly into the bloodstream. She should already be dead, but her heart, impossibly, was still beating. Lucien looked down at her face, slack with unconsciousness, and felt that unfamiliar thing twist deeper. Not guilt. He'd done nothing wrong. Not attraction. She was dying and broken. Something else. Something he didn't have a word for in any of the languages he'd learned across 5 centuries. Obligation. She'd saved his life. Saved his crown. Saved the entire carefully balanced structure of power he'd spent 200 years building in the city. The Bloodlord families had been growing bold, whispers of rebellion in the court, questions about whether Lucien Crowe had grown too comfortable, too distant, too human in his rule. Tonight's assassination was meant to be the spark. Kill the king in a mortal establishment. Blame the humans. Let chaos reshape the city while stronger hands seized control. But this waitress, with her cheap uniform and duct-taped boots, had thrown herself into the path of a coup without knowing it. The least he could do was make sure she survived, even if it cost him everything. Mercy Hospital's private wing didn't officially exist. It occupied 3 subterranean floors beneath the main building, accessible only through service elevators that required biometric clearance and a particular kind of willingness to ignore screams. Lucien carried Mara through the doors at 12:17 a.m. By 12:23. She was on an operating table surrounded by doctors who weren't technically doctors anymore, and equipment that had never been FDA approved. "The silver is spreading through her bloodstream," Victor said, his gloved hands hovering over Mara's exposed back. The bullets had been removed, but the wounds weren't closing. They wept that strange, luminescent blood. "It's killing her cells faster than her body can replace them. She has minutes, maybe less. Then work faster." Lucien stood at the head of the table, his hands gripping the metal frame hard enough to leave dents. "My lord." Victor's voice was gentle, which meant he was about to say something Lucien didn't want to hear. "Even if we extract the silver completely, the damage is catastrophic. Both lungs are compromised. The bullet near her heart nicked the left ventricle. She's lost almost half her blood volume. There's no medical intervention that can—" "Then use medical intervention." The room went silent. Victor's eyes widened. "The Covenant expressly forbids blood magic on humans without—" "I am the Covenant." Lucien's voice dropped to something that made the walls feel smaller, the air feel thinner. "I am the king they tried to kill tonight. I am the law in this city, and I am telling you to save her life." "If you do this," Victor swallowed hard, "if you bind your blood to hers, there will be consequences. Political consequences. The other families will call it weakness. They'll say you've compromised your judgment for a human. The heart monitor's beeping stuttered, slowed. Mara's lips were blue now. Lucien looked down at her face. This stranger who'd screamed a warning instead of running, who jumped instead of hiding, who'd chosen death for someone she'd never met. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "Prepare the ritual." Victor hesitated one more moment. Then he nodded and began pulling vials from a locked case, liquids that glowed in colors that didn't exist in nature. Lucien rolled up his sleeve. The scalpel Victor handed him was silver, not enchanted, just pure. And when he drew it across his wrist, his blood fell in drops that sizzled when they hit Mara's skin. Ancient words filled the air. Latin, older than Latin. Words from before Rome, before writing, before humans had names for the things that hunted them in the dark. The forbidden magic tasted like copper and ash and breaking oaths. Mara's body arched on the table. The monitor screamed, and then silence. The flat, endless tone of a heart that had stopped. "My lord." Victor's voice cracked with panic. Lucien didn't move, didn't breathe. He kept his bleeding wrist over Mara's chest and spoke one more word. A command, a plea, a demand. Her heart answered. Thump. One beat. Impossible. Thump. Another. Stronger. Thump. 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 The monitor erupted back into frantic beeping. Mara gasped, a wet, rattling sound, and her eyes flew open, unseeing, pupils blown wide. Then they rolled back again, and she went still. But she was breathing. And Lucien Crowe, the Vampire King, felt something he hadn't felt in 500 years. Relief. The first thing Mara became aware of was the taste of copper and ash on her tongue. The second was the sound, a steady mechanical beeping that seemed to come from very far away and also from inside her own skull simultaneously. The third was pain, not the sharp, bright agony she expected from being shot 4 times. This was different, deeper, like her bones were being rewritten in a language her body didn't know how to read. She tried to open her eyes, couldn't. Tried to move her fingers, couldn't do that either. Somewhere nearby, voices spoke in urgent tones. Readings don't make sense. Should be in multi-organ failure. Heart rate is too steady. It's like she's not even... The voices dissolved into static. Mara fell. She was in a stone room lit by candles that burned with green flame. A man knelt before a throne made of bones, and when he looked up, his eyes were the color of old blood. You cannot refuse the summons, Lucien. The elders demand. Let them demand. The voice came from behind her, cold as winter wind. I am not their servant anymore. The scene shattered like glass. She was running through a burning city. Prague, maybe, or Vienna. Somewhere old, somewhere the streets remembered centuries of blood. Screams echoed off cobblestones. A woman with a child clutched to her chest ran past, not seeing Mara, not seeing anything but the flames. This is what happens when we show mercy. A different voice this time, smooth and cruel. This is what happens when we forget what we are. No. Lucien's voice again, but younger, raw with something that might have been grief. This is what happens when we forget what they are. The fire consumed everything. She was in a ballroom filled with people who weren't people. They wore beautiful gowns and tailored suits. They danced to music Mara couldn't hear, and when they smiled, their teeth were too sharp, too many. Lucien stood at the edge of the room, alone, even in the crowd, watching them all with eyes that held 5 centuries of weariness. Do you ever tire of it? A woman appeared beside him, young and lovely and dead, pretending. Every night, he said quietly. But the alternative is worse. The ballroom folded into darkness. Mara surfaced with a gasp that felt like drowning in reverse. Her eyes opened to fluorescent lights that stabbed directly into her brain. She tried to cry out, but her throat was hoarse and raw, filled with something that tasted like old pennies and burnt sugar. Hands pressed her back down, gentle but firm. Miss Vale, you need to stay still. You're in Mercy Hospital. You've been shot. Do you understand me? Mara tried to focus on the face hovering above her. A doctor, maybe. His features kept sliding around like oil on water. She nodded, or thought she did. Good. We're going to run some more tests. Try to rest. Rest right, as if the world would stop spinning long enough. She closed her eyes, and the nightmares came rushing back. Time became fluid. Mara would surface into consciousness for minutes or hours. She couldn't tell where everything was too loud, too bright, too much. She could hear conversations 3 rooms away, could smell the antiseptic, and beneath it the copper scent of blood in 4 bags. Could feel the individual threads in the hospital gown against her skin like razor wire. Then she'd slip back under into dreams that weren't hers. A memory of standing on a cliff watching the sunrise, knowing it would be the last sunrise. The choice between immortality and death. The moment the world went cold and would never be warm again. A memory of a woman with dark hair and sad eyes saying, "I'm sorry, Issa," as she drove a stake through someone's heart. The betrayal burning worse than the wood. A memory of building an empire in the shadows, of learning that power and loneliness were the same words spoken in different languages. Lucien's memories. Somehow, impossibly, Lucien's memories were bleeding into her mind like ink and water. When Mara finally woke, truly woke, it was to find herself in a private hospital room that was far too nice for someone with her insurance. The lights were dimmed. Snow fell past the window in lazy spirals. A machine beside her bed beeped with mechanical steadiness, tracking a heartbeat that felt wrong in her chest. Too slow, too strong, too controlled. She lifted one hand, expecting pain, expecting the weakness of a body that had been shredded by bullets. Instead, her arm moved smoothly. No tremor, no hesitation. That was wrong. Mara looked down at herself. IV lines ran into her arms. Bandages wrapped her torso, but beneath them, she could feel something strange. Not healing, already healed. The wounds that should have taken months to recover from felt like they'd closed in days. How long had she been here? She tried to sit up. Her body obeyed instantly with a strength that made her dizzy. The room tilted but didn't spin. Her vision sharpened instead, crystallized until she could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could count the threads in the curtain across the room. "You should rest." Mara's head snapped toward the voice. He sat in the corner she hadn't noticed, perfectly still in a leather chair that looked like it had been brought in specifically for him. The shadows seemed to gather around him naturally, as if he was the kind of person darkness recognized as its own. Lucienne, silver hair, pale eyes, the same expensive coat, though now she noticed the bloodstains, her bloodstains, had been cleaned away. Mara's breath caught. Memories crashed over her, not the dream memories but real ones. The restaurant, the gunman, the way she'd moved without thinking, throwing herself forward, the bullets punching through her back like hammers. "You're alive," Lucian said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. "I think so." Mara's voice came out hoarse and raw, scraping. "Am I?" Something flickered in those winter frost eyes. "Yes." "How?" She looked down at her hands again. They weren't shaking. They should be shaking. "I was shot 4 times. I felt..." The memory tried to surface and she shoved it down. "I should be dead." "You were." Lucian didn't move from the shadows. "For 47 seconds your heart stopped. I brought you back." The way he said it, simple, factual, as if resurrection was just another item on a to-do list, made Mara's stomach twist. The bills. She grasped for something normal, something she could understand. "I can't afford. This room alone must cost. Taken care of. I don't accept charity." "It's not charity." Lucian's voice carried an edge now, something sharp beneath the silk. "You took 4 bullets meant for me. This is the least of what I owe you." "Meant for you?" Mara's mind tried to piece together what that meant. "Who are they? Why did they—" She stopped, looked at him more carefully. "Who are you?" In the dim light, Lucienne's eyes caught the glow from the machines, reflecting it back like an animal's, like something that wasn't entirely human. "Someone who has made many enemies over a very long life," he said. "Someone who should have let you die rather than break the laws I broke to save you." The words hung in the air like smoke. Mara stared at him. This stranger who sat in shadows like they were a throne, who moved like gravity was optional, whose memories had somehow bled into her dreams. "What did you do to me?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Lucienne stood then, moving with that same inhuman grace she remembered from the restaurant. He crossed to the window, keeping distance between them, and looked out at the falling snow. "I bound my blood to yours," he said. "Ancient magic, forbidden magic. You were dying from enchanted silver, and the only way to save you was to give you something strong enough to fight the poison." He paused. "You're not a vampire, Mara, but you're not entirely human anymore either." The heart monitor beside the bed continued its steady, impossible rhythm. Mara looked down at her hands again, these hands that didn't shake, that moved with strength she'd never had. That belonged to a body she didn't recognize. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to demand answers. But before she could, Lucienne turned from the window, and their eyes met. Truly met, for the first time since she'd woken. His expression held things she didn't have names for. Guilt, wonder, something darker and more complicated that made her chest tighten. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for what I've made you." Mara held his gaze and felt her new impossible heartbeat once against her ribs. "Tell me everything," she said. Lucian told her everything, or at least he told her enough. Vampires were real. The city belonged to them, or more accurately, to him. The assassination attempt was political. The bullets were meant to end his reign. She'd gotten in the way. He spoke in that measured, controlled way of his, as if he were explaining a business transaction, rather than the complete dissolution of reality as Mara had understood it. When he finished, she sat in silence for a full minute. Then she laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was the kind of laughter that came from somewhere dark and exhausted, the kind that meant you'd reached the limit of what your brain could process and something had to give. "So I saved the Vampire King," she said when she could breathe again. "Of course I did, because my life wasn't complicated enough already." Lucian's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested he hadn't expected that reaction. "You're handling this well," he observed. "Am I?" Mara touched her chest, feeling that too steady heartbeat. "Because I feel like I'm losing my mind." "You're not. I promise you that. Forgive me if I don't take comfort from promises made by someone who just told me he's an immortal creature of the night." The corner of Lucien's mouth twitched. It might have been a smile. "Fair enough." 3 days later, Mara was discharged. She'd expected to return to her apartment, the one with the eviction notices piling up, the one that smelled like mildew and broken dreams. Instead, a woman in an expensive suit met her in the hospital lobby and handed her a key. "Your new residence," the woman said with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Crow has arranged everything." "I didn't ask for a new residence." Nevertheless, the woman pressed the key into Mara's hand. "The address is on the fob. Your belongings have been moved. The lease is paid through the year." Then she left before Mara could argue. The apartment was in a building Mara had walked past 100 times, but never imagined entering. The kind of building with a doorman and marble floors and elevators that didn't smell like despair. Her things, her pathetic collection of second-hand furniture and boxes of her father's books, looked lost in the spacious rooms. Someone had arranged it all carefully, respectfully, as if her cheap particle board desk belonged on gleaming hardwood floors. Mara stood in the middle of the living room and felt something tight and angry coil in her chest. She pulled out her phone and called the number Lucien had given her. He answered on the first ring. "Mara, take it back." A pause. "The apartment, all of it. The apartment, the furniture arrangement, whatever you did to make my debts disappear. Yes, I checked. And yes, I know that was you." Her voice shook with fury. She didn't try to hide it. "Take it back." "I can't do that." "You mean you won't?" "No." His voice remained infuriatingly calm. "I mean, some things once done cannot be undone. Your debts are paid. The apartment is leased. These are facts now." "I didn't consent to any of this. You were unconscious. That's not consent, that's—" Mara pressed her free hand against her forehead, trying to contain the headache building behind her eyes. Except there was no headache. Her body felt fine, which somehow made everything worse. "You can't just rearrange someone's life without asking." "I can." A beat. "I did." "That's not— You don't get to." She struggled for words. "This is control. This is you deciding what's best for me without giving me a choice." "Yes," Lucien said quietly. "It is." His honesty stunned her into momentary silence. "I saved your life," he continued, "but in doing so, I made you visible to things that hunt in the darkness, made you valuable to people who would use you against me. The apartment has protections, wards, safeguards you cannot see, but that will keep you alive." His voice dropped lower. "Would you prefer I let you return to a building with broken locks and fire escapes that lead nowhere, where any of my enemies could reach you?" "I'd prefer you asked me first, and if you'd said no—" Mara had no answer for that. He came to see her that evening, appearing on her balcony without using the door like a normal person. Mara didn't scream. She was getting used to the impossible. "You're watching me," she said instead of hello. "Yes." "Guards I can't see?" "Yes." "How many?" "Enough." Mara crossed her arms, hating how small she felt in this huge apartment she hadn't earned. "I'm not a damsel who needs protecting." Lucien stepped inside, graceful and predatory. In the warm light of her living room, he looked even more out of place, too elegant, too dangerous, too other. "No," he agreed. "You're a woman who threw herself in front of 4 bullets without hesitation, which is precisely why you need protecting." His eyes met hers. "From yourself, if nothing else." "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Mara." For the first time she heard something like frustration in his voice. "You made a choice that night. I made a choice to save you. Now we both live with the consequences." They stood in tense silence. Finally, Mara sighed. I don't know how to be grateful and angry at the same time. Then don't be grateful. Lucien moved toward the balcony. Be alive, that's enough. He was gone before she could respond. That night, Mara decided to test her boundaries. She left the apartment, ignoring the doorman's concerned look, and walked 3 blocks to the corner store where she used to buy her groceries. The city felt different now, sharper, more dangerous. She could hear conversations from open windows, could smell things she'd never noticed before, exhaust and rotting garbage, and beneath it all something else, something wild. She was halfway back when she felt it. Someone following her, not Lucien's guards. She'd learned to sense them, shadows that moved when she moved, keeping careful distance. This was different, closer, hungrier. Mara's new instinct screamed at her to run. Instead, she kept walking, kept her pace steady, and waited. The presence got closer. Then nothing. A sound like wind or wings or something being removed very quickly and very quietly. When Mara turned around, the street behind her was empty, but there was blood on the sidewalk that hadn't been there before. She looked up toward the rooftops and saw a figure in the darkness, too far away to identify, but she knew Lucien's guards had just saved her life, and she'd never even seen the danger coming. Now, before we continue with what happens when Mara discovers the truth about what she's become, I want to know, are you Team Lucien, or are you thinking Mara should have run when she had the chance? Drop a comment and let me know, because this story is about to get even more intense. And if you haven't hit subscribe yet, do it now. Seriously, tomorrow's story involves a different kind of dangerous attraction that you absolutely cannot miss. Plus, I love seeing where my story family is watching from. Whether you're listening during your commute at work or curled up in bed at midnight like me, tell me in the comments, where are you right now? And are you as obsessed with this forbidden bond as I am? Okay, let's get back to Mara and Lucien. Lucien was waiting in her apartment when she got back. He sat in the chair by the window, her chair, the one her father used to read in, like he'd been there for hours. Maybe he had been. Mara slammed the door harder than necessary. Someone just tried to kill me. I know. Your guards stopped them. Yes. I didn't even see it happen. She threw her keys on the counter, heard them clatter with her new too-sharp hearing. 1 second I was being followed. The next there's blood on the sidewalk and I'm supposed to just what? Keep walking? Pretend this is normal? Lucien stood, moving with that fluid grace that no longer startled her. You were never in real danger. My people wouldn't have let... That's not the point. The words exploded out of her. The point is, I didn't know I was in danger until it was already over. The point is, I'm living in a world I don't understand with rules I don't know, surrounded by guards I can't see, protecting me from threats I can't identify. She advanced on him, fury overriding any sense of self-preservation. You saved my life, and then you took it over. I gave you a life worth protecting. You gave me a gilded cage. Better a cage than a grave. His voice hardened, matching her anger with something colder. You want the full truth, Mara? Here it is. You have my blood in your veins now. Every vampire in this city can sense it, can smell it on you. To them, you're a curiosity at best and a weapon at worst. Something to study, to capture, to dissect and understand. The words hit like physical blows. The Bloodlord families are watching you, Lucien continued relentlessly. Wondering what you mean to me. Wondering if killing you would weaken me or if taking you would give them leverage. Your existence has become political, whether you want it to be or not. Then why? Mara's voice cracked. Why save me at all? Why not just let me die and avoid all this? Lucien went very still. Because no one has ever chosen me without knowing what I am. The confession hung in the air between them. 500 years, he said quietly. 500 years of people kneeling because I am king. Of alliances formed from fear and respect and calculated advantage. Of lovers who wanted immortality or power or protection. His eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something raw beneath the ice. No one has ever just jumped. Not for me. For a stranger in a restaurant who they thought might die. Mara's anger wavered, caught between fury and something more complicated. You didn't know I could save you, Lucien continued. Didn't know I was worth saving. You just saw someone about to be killed and decided your life was worth trading for theirs. He shook his head slowly. That kind of choice, that kind of foolish, selfless human choice, it's not something I've seen in centuries. So this is what gratitude. Mara's laugh was bitter. You're controlling my life because you're grateful? I'm protecting your life because I refuse to let that choice be meaningless. His voice turned fierce. You saved a king, Mara, whether you knew it or not, and kings don't forget their debts. I'm not a debt to be repaid. She closed the distance between them, close enough to feel the unnatural cold that radiated from him. I'm a person with agency, with the right to decide what risks I take and what life I live. Even if those decisions get you killed, yes, the word came out like a punch. Even then, especially then. They stood inches apart, breathing hard, or at least she was breathing hard. Lucienne was perfectly still, perfectly controlled, perfectly infuriating. You want to know something? Mara said, her voice dropping to something raw and honest. I would do it again. Right now, knowing everything I know, if I could go back to that moment, I would still jump. Lucien's expression fractured just for a second, just enough for her to see the man beneath the king. Why? The question came out barely above a whisper. Because that's who I am. Mara held his gaze. I'm the person who jumps, who makes stupid, selfless choices, who can't stand by and watch someone die even when it's the smart thing to do. She took a breath. And you're the person who saves people even when it costs you everything. So maybe we're both idiots. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across Lucien's face. Perhaps. The anger between them shifted, transformed into something else. Not quite understanding, but maybe the beginning of it. I need boundaries, Mara said finally. If this is going to work, if I'm going to survive whatever this is, I need you to stop making decisions for me. I can't promise your safety. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for respect. She straightened her shoulders. You protect me. Fine. But you talk to me. You explain things. You treat me like a partner in this mess, not a porcelain doll you're afraid will shatter. Lucienne considered her for a long moment. Then slowly he extended his hand. Equal footing, as he said, as much as is possible between a king and the woman who saved him. Mara looked at his hand, pale, cold, belonging to something that had walked through centuries, and thought about everything that accepting it would mean. Then she took it. His grip was firm, controlled, and ice-cold against her palm, but it was also steady. Partners, she said. Partners, he agreed. They shook on it. This fragile truce between mortal and immortal, between a waitress and a king, between two people who'd saved each other's lives and had no idea what came next. When Lucienne released her hand, he stepped back toward the window. There will be more attempts, he said, his tone shifting to something more formal. Business. My enemies won't stop because we've called a truce. I know. You'll need to learn to defend yourself, to understand the world you're part of now. Then teach me. Lucienne's eyes gleamed in the darkness. Tomorrow, 8:00 p.m., wear something you can move in. He was gone before she could ask what that meant. Vanishing into the night like smoke. Mara stood alone in her new apartment and looked down at her hand, the one that had shaken on a bargain with the Vampire King. It didn't shake. Now, whatever she was becoming, whoever this new version of herself would be, at least she'd chosen it or chosen to accept it, which felt like the same thing. She locked the balcony door, futile probably, but the gesture mattered and went to bed. For the first time since the shooting, she slept without nightmares. Training began at 8:00 p.m. sharp. Lucien met her on the roof of her building, a space that should have been locked, but apparently wasn't when you were the Vampire King. The city spread out below them, a glittering sprawl of lights and shadows. Your senses have changed, he said without preamble. You need to learn to use them before they overwhelm you. They already overwhelm me. Mara rubbed her temples. Everything is too loud, too bright. I can smell what the neighbors are cooking 3 floors down. That's the beginning. It will get stronger. Lucienne moved to stand beside her at the edge. Close your eyes. Why? Because I'm asking you to trust me. Mara hesitated, then closed her eyes. Now breathe. Lucian instructed. Not shallow, deep. Let the air tell you what's out there. She inhaled slowly. At first, just the expected city smells. Exhaust, garbage, a restaurant somewhere nearby. But beneath that, something else. Something that made her skin prickle. "What is that?" she whispered. "It smells like copper and ozone and magic." Lucien's voice was approving. "You're sensing the wards on this building, the protective spells woven into the foundation. Most humans never develop that awareness. You have it after 3 days." Mara opened her eyes. "Is that normal?" "Nothing about you is normal anymore." He turned to face her fully. "My blood changed you more than I anticipated. You're adapting faster, sensing more. It's both remarkable and dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because you're visible now. Not just to my people, but to anything with supernatural awareness." His expression darkened. "They can smell what you are, Mara. Human blood mixed with something ancient, something that shouldn't exist." A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with the November wind. "What am I to them?" she asked. "A question? An anomaly? A threat?" He paused. "And to some, an opportunity." The attack came 2 nights later. Mara was walking back from the corner market. Despite Lucien's protests, she'd insisted on maintaining some normalcy when the smell hit her. Wrong. Everything suddenly smelled wrong, like rotting flowers and burnt sugar, like something sweet masking something dead. Her new instinct screamed. She turned, scanning the street, and saw it. Pale skin, too wide smile, eyes that caught the streetlight and reflected it back like a cat's. Except no cat had ever looked at anything with that kind of hunger. The vampire. Because that's what it was. She knew it in her bones, stood 20 feet away watching her, waiting. "You smell like him," it said, and its voice was beautiful and horrible. "Like the king, his blood singing in your veins." Mara backed up slowly, every survival instinct firing. Her phone was in her pocket. The guards were supposed to be nearby, but suddenly the street felt very empty and very quiet. "Stay back," she managed. The vampire tilted its head. "I just want to taste just a little, to understand what makes you special enough for Lucian Crow to break every law." It moved, not walked, moved faster than her eyes could track, closing the distance in a blink. Mara's body reacted before her mind could catch up. She twisted sideways, felt claws whisper past her throat, missing by inches. And then Lucien was there. He materialized out of shadow itself. One hand locked around the vampire's throat, slamming it against a brick wall with force that cracked stone. "Who sent you?" His voice was winter and death. The vampire laughed wetly. "Everyone knows about her now. Everyone. The Bloodlord families are taking bets on how long she'll survive." Lucian's hand tightened. "Who sent you? Does it matter?" "Blood." "Black. Wrong," leaked from the vampire's mouth. "You can't protect her from everyone, and they're all so curious." Something in Lucien's face changed, hardened. What he did next was too fast for Mara to see clearly, but the vampire's scream cut off abruptly, and when Lucien stepped back, the thing collapsed into ash. He turned to Mara, eyes blazing crimson. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Good." He pulled out his phone, began typing rapidly. "That changes everything." The apartment was crowded an hour later. 4 vampires stood in Mara's living room, ancient, powerful, and radiating the kind of authority that made her want to back into a corner. Lucien had introduced them as his inner circle, the ones he trusted. "Absolutely." "The court is talking," said Casimir, the oldest-looking one with silver at his temples. "Not just talking, they're acting. That wasn't a rogue tonight. That was a test to see if she's really protected," added Victor, the blood mage who'd saved her. "To see if you'll actually defend a human." "She's not human anymore," Lucian said coldly. "She carries my blood. That makes her mine to protect." "That makes her a political statement," Casimir corrected. "The families see weakness. They see the king who once raised cities, now protecting a mortal woman. They think you've gone soft." "Let them think it." Lucian's voice was ice. "And let them know what happens to anyone who touches her. They already do." Victor pulled out a tablet, showed them a message. Lady Morgana has put a price on her. Not for death, for capture. She wants to study what Mara is, wants to understand the bond. Mara felt her stomach drop. There's a bounty on me. 50 Zodrolals, Victor said apologetically. Gold, not currency. That's, Mara tried to process, that's a lot. That's enough to start a feeding frenzy, Casimir said bluntly. Every desperate, hungry vampire in the city will be hunting you now. Lucian's jaw clenched. Then we increase security, lockdown. No. Mara's voice cut through the room. Everyone turned to stare at her. No, she repeated stronger. I'm not going into hiding. That's what they want, to see you cage me to prove you're afraid. I am afraid. Lucian said, You almost died tonight. But I didn't. She held his gaze. Your blood makes me stronger, right? Faster. Then train me faster. Teach me to fight, but don't make me a prisoner. The room fell silent. Finally, Casimir laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I like her. She's either very brave or very stupid. Both, Lucien muttered. But he looked at Mara with something that might have been pride. Fine, but we do this my way. Full training, full protection. No exceptions. Mara nodded. After the others left, Lucien stood at the window, staring out at the city. They've made you a target, he said quietly. A confirmed, official target. All because of what I did to save you. Mara moved to stand beside him. Are you saying you regret it? I'm saying. He paused. I'm saying I've started something I don't know how to finish, and I don't know if keeping you alive will cost you everything that makes you who you are. She looked at their reflections in the glass, the immortal king and the waitress who jumped. Then I guess we'll find out together, she said. Outside, the city glittered with 1,000 predatory eyes, all watching, all waiting. The hunt had officially begun. I need to pause here for just a second because things are about to get absolutely explosive. But first, if you're loving the story, if Mara's courage and Lucian's struggle is giving you all the feels, smash that like button. And listen, I see some of you watching without subscribing, and I get it. But here's what you're missing. Tomorrow, I have a story lined up that's going to wreck you in the best way possible. Different characters, same intensity, same impossible choices that will have you yelling at your screen. So, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments what you think is going to happen next. Will Mara stay or will she run? Will Lucien lose his throne? And seriously, where are you all watching from? I love knowing my story family is spread across the world, all of us connected by our love for these epic emotional tales. Now let's see how this all unfolds. The ambush happened in broad daylight. Mara was at the small cafe 2 blocks from her apartment, the one place Lucien had reluctantly agreed she could visit alone during daytime hours. Vampires didn't walk in sunlight. She should have been safe. She should have been. The explosion came without warning. One moment Mara was paying for her coffee. The next, the front window shattered inward in a spray of glass and fire. The blast threw her backward into a table. Screams erupted around her. Through the smoke and ringing in her ears, Mara saw them. Not vampires, humans. 3 men in tactical gear, faces covered, carrying weapons that hummed with the same wrong magic smell she'd learned to recognize. They moved through the cafe systematically, not shooting, not killing, searching. "Where is she?" one of them shouted. "The waitress, the one who smells like dead things." Mara's blood went cold. A young mother clutched her daughter, sobbing. An elderly man lay on the floor, blood streaming from a gash on his head. The barista, college-aged, terrified, raised his hands in surrender. "Please," he begged, "we don't know who you are." The gunman hit him across the face with the weapon. The boy dropped. Rage ignited in Mara's chest. White-hot and overwhelming, she stood. "I'm here," she said. All 3 guns swung toward her. "There you are." The leader's voice was pleased. "Lady Morgana sends her regards." He raised his weapon. Not a gun, something else. Something that crackled with energy that made Mara's new blood burn. She braced herself. The cafe door exploded outward. Lucien moved through the space like a force of nature, like violence given form. He was on the first gunman before the man could scream. moving too fast for human eyes. And what he did, Mara had never seen anything like it. Blood. So much blood. Screams that cut off too quickly, the sound of bones breaking like wet branches. The second gunman fired his weapon. The energy blast hit Lucian square in the chest and he staggered. Actually staggered, smoke rising from burned fabric. Then he smiled. It was the most terrifying thing Mara had ever seen. "Run," Lucien said softly. The gunman tried. He made it 3 steps before Lucien caught him. The third man was smarter. He grabbed the college kid from the floor, held the weapon to his head. "Back off, or he dies." Lucien stopped, his eyes blazing crimson now, nothing human left in them, fixed on the hostage. "Please," the boy whimpered. For one terrible moment, Mara saw the calculation in Lucien's face, saw him weighing lives and consequences, saw the king who'd ruled for centuries, deciding if one human life mattered. "Lucien," Mara said quietly. His eyes snapped to hers, and something in him shifted. He moved not toward the gunman, but away, hands raised in apparent surrender. The gunman's attention followed him. Weapon tracking. Mara lunged, her new speed, her new strength. She crossed the distance in a heartbeat, grabbed the weapon's barrel, and yanked it away from the boy's head. The blast went wide, scorching the ceiling. Lucien was there an instant later, and it was over. The cafe was a nightmare of blood and smoke by the time the police arrived. Mara stood outside, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, watching EMTs load the injured. The mother and daughter bruised but alive. The elderly man concussed but stable. The college kid traumatized but breathing. They'd survived, barely. Lucien stood apart from the crowd, perfectly still, his expensive coat ruined with blood. Human blood, and something darker. His eyes had returned to their usual winter grey, but Mara had seen what lived beneath. She walked over to him. "You killed them," she said. "Not an accusation, a fact." "Yes. In front of everyone, the police will find no bodies." His voice was flat. "My people are handling it." Mara looked at the blood on his hands. "I should have felt horrified. I should have felt afraid." Instead, she felt angry that it had been necessary. "They came for me," she said. "Those people got hurt because of me." "No." Lucien turned to face her fully. "They got hurt because my enemies are willing to burn the world to get to you, because I have made you a symbol, and symbols make people do monstrous things. You saved them. I was too late." Something raw cracked through his control. "I was too late because I've been distracted, compromised. 500 years of discipline, and suddenly I can't think clearly, because a mortal woman might be in danger." The words hung between them like a confession. "The court knows," Lucien continued, his voice low and dangerous. "They've called an assembly for tonight, a formal challenge to my authority. They'll argue I've grown weak. That protecting you proves I'm no longer fit to rule. What will you tell them?" "The truth." His eyes met hers, and for the first time since the attack, she saw something other than ice. "That they're right, that you have made me weak in ways I don't fully understand, that keeping you alive matters more to me than keeping their respect." Mara's breath caught. "Which means war," Lucien said quietly. "Real war, not just assassination attempts, but open conflict. The city will burn. Innocents will die. All because I refuse to let you go." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from him. "So I'm giving you a choice, Mara Vale, the choice I should have given you from the beginning." His voice turned gentle, the most terrifying sound of all. "Leave tonight. I'll set you up somewhere far from here with enough money to start over. I'll erase every trace of what you've become. You'll be safe. And if I stay?" "If you stay," he looked away, jaw clenched. "If you stay, you'll watch me become the monster they think I am. You'll see me do terrible things to protect you. You'll be at the center of a war you never asked for." He looked back at her. "And I will do everything in my power to keep you alive, even if it costs me my crown." Mara stood in the wreckage of a cafe that had been attacked because of her, looked at the blood on Lucien's hands that he'd spilled to save her, thought about the young mother, the elderly man, the terrified barista. "I need to think," she whispered. Lucien nodded once. "You have until midnight. After that, the court convenes and there's no going back." He vanished into shadow, leaving her alone with the sirens and the smoke and the weight of a choice that would reshape everything. Mara stood in her apartment as the sun set, watching the city transform into something else, something darker, something that now felt like hers. She'd spent the afternoon thinking about her father, who'd taught her that running from hard choices only made them harder. About the people in the cafe who'd bled because of her existence. About Lucien's face when he'd said, "You have made me weak." About the moment she jumped without thinking and how that moment had led to this one. At 11:47 p.m., she walked into the abandoned cathedral, where Lucien had told her the court would convene. The place was full of vampires, dozens of them, ancient and powerful, filling the pews and shadows. They turned as one when she entered, eyes gleaming in the darkness like wolves. Lucien stood at the altar facing them. When he saw her, something in his expression shifted, relief and dread mixed together. "I'm staying," Mara said clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. The chamber erupted in whispers. A woman stepped forward, beautiful, deadly, with dark hair and eyes like polished obsidian. Lady Morgana, the one who'd put the bounty on Mara's head. "This is your weakness," she said to Lucien. "This mortal girl who makes you hesitate, who makes you feel." "Yes," Lucien agreed. "She is." The admission silenced the room. "But she is also," he continued, his voice carrying centuries of authority. "The reason I remember what we're supposed to be protecting. We rule this city in the shadows. We feed on its blood. But we do not slaughter innocents in cafes to prove our strength." His eyes swept across the assembly. "Anyone who does will answer to me. You're choosing her over us." Someone called from the shadows, "I'm choosing a different kind of rule." Lucien moved to stand beside Mara, not in front of her, beside her. "One where power isn't just about fear, where the king can acknowledge that a mortal woman's courage matters more than 1,000 years of tyranny." "That's not strength," Morgana hissed. "That's sentiment." "Then let me demonstrate strength." Lucien's voice dropped to something that made the ancient stone walls feel fragile. "Anyone who harms her harms what is mine. And I will show you exactly what 5 centuries of restrained violence looks like when unleashed." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Finally, an old vampire in the back, older than any of them, scarred and weathered, laughed. "The king has spoken," he said. "Let it be so." One by one the others bowed. Not all of them. Not Morgana, who left with murder in her eyes. But enough. Enough that Lucien's rule would hold. For now, training began the next night in earnest. Lucien brought in Victor and Casimir, along with others from his inner circle, who were willing to teach a human-turned-something else how to survive. "You're faster than a human," Victor explained, watching Mara dodge practice strikes. "But not as fast as us. You're stronger, but not strong enough to overpower a full vampire. Your advantage is that you're unexpected. Use it." Mara learned to fight dirty, to use weapons designed to channel her strange new blood, to sense magic before it struck, to move through shadows the way Lucien had taught her. Not quite invisible, but close enough. She learned her limits through pain and repetition. She couldn't go full days without sleep anymore. Her body needed rest more than human, but less than before. She healed quickly, but not instantly. Sunlight didn't burn her, but it made her uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that didn't fit right. She was something in between, something new. "You're adapting," Lucien told her one night after training, his voice holding something like pride. "Faster than I thought possible." They stood on her balcony. Their balcony now, in any way that mattered, since he spent more time here than his own residence. The city sprawled below them, beautiful and dangerous. "I had a good teacher," Mara said. "You had necessity." He turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his features were softer than usual, almost human. Most people would have broken by now, run, hid, pretended none of this was real. "I'm not most people." "No." His hand moved, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder. Just a brief contact, but it carried weight. "You're not." The moment stretched between them, charged with things neither was ready to name. Then Lucien's phone buzzed. He checked it and his expression hardened. "What is it?" Mara asked. "Reports from the border territories. 3 of my outposts have gone dark." He pulled up a map, showed her red markers spreading across the screen. "Someone is mobilizing, building an army. Morgana and others." Lucien's jaw clenched. "They're not waiting for me to weaken naturally. They're going to force the issue." Mara felt her new blood run cold. "How long do we have?" "Days, maybe less." He looked at her, eyes grave. "This is your last chance to leave, Mara. Once the fighting starts." "I'm not leaving." She squared her shoulders. "We're partners, remember? Equal footing." Something flickered in his expression. Gratitude, regret, something deeper. "Partners," he agreed quietly. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. Lucien fortified the city's defenses, called in ancient debts, assembled those loyal to him, fewer than Mara expected, but each one formidable. Mara trained until her body screamed, then trained more. She learned the names of Lucien's enemies, studied the politics she'd stumbled into, became fluent in a language of blood and power she never wanted to speak. And through it all, she and Lucien moved around each other like binary stars, separate but bound, each one's gravity affecting the other's orbit. He taught her to dance the formal dances of the vampire court because she'd need to know them. She taught him to laugh at bad movies because he'd forgotten how. They didn't kiss, didn't cross that line. But when they stood together, the space between them felt electric. On the 4th night, Victor burst into the apartment without knocking. "They're coming," he said. "Morgana's forces. They'll be at the city limits by dawn." Lucien stood, his face shifting from the almost human softness Mara had grown familiar with, back to the mask of the vampire king. "Gather everyone," he commanded. "It's time." He turned to Mara, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw fear in his ancient eyes. "Stay close to me," and he said. "No matter what happens, always," she promised. Outside, the city held its breath. The war had begun. The final battle came at dawn. Morgana's forces breached the inner city just as the sun threatened the horizon. A calculated move. Fight in the dying darkness. Retreat before the light. Strike when the vampire king would be at his weakest. She hadn't counted on Mara. They fought in the old district where cobblestones still remembered centuries of blood. Lucien's loyalists held the center, while Morgana's alliance circled like wolves. The air reeked of magic and violence. Mara moved through it all with deadly grace, her body executing movements she'd only learned days ago with a precision that came from something deeper. Survival. Purpose. The absolute refusal to let Lucien face this alone. She saw him across the battlefield, a figure of winter fury, silver hair whipping in wind that came from nowhere, cutting through his enemies with surgical precision. He was magnificent and terrible, every inch the vampire king. Then she saw the trap. 3 of Morgana's lieutenants, converging from different angles while Lucien was occupied. Enchanted blades that glowed with the same wrong light as the bullets that had nearly killed her. Mara didn't think, didn't calculate. She jumped. Her body collided with the nearest attacker, disrupting the formation. The enchanted blade missed Lucien by inches, scoring his shoulder instead of his heart. He spun, registered what had happened, and something blazed in his eyes that made the temperature drop. What followed was carnage. Lucien moved like a force of nature unleashed, like 500 years of restraint had finally shattered. The 3 attackers didn't stand a chance. Neither did the dozen who rushed to their aid. By the time he stopped breathing hard despite not needing to breathe at all, the cobblestones were painted red, and Mara stood beside him, blood spattered and fierce, very much alive. The rest of Morgana's forces faltered, broke, ran. The court convened at sunset in the great hall beneath the city, the one Mara had only seen in fragmented memories. Ancient stone columns stretched toward vaulted ceilings. Torches burned with that unnatural green flame. Every vampire of consequence in the city was present. Lucien stood at the center, Mara at his side, not hidden, not protected in some back room, right there, visible to all. "You have made your objections clear." Lucien's voice carried through the chamber with absolute authority. You believe this mortal woman makes me weak. You believe my protection of her proves I am unfit to rule. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. You are correct, he continued, and the murmurs died. She does make me weak. She makes me hesitate. She makes me consider the cost of my decisions in ways I have not done in centuries. Morgana, captured, bound with silver chains, laughed bitterly from where she knelt. Then you admit it. You admit you are compromised. I admit, Lucien said quietly, that I have been reminded of what it means to rule with something other than fear. His eyes swept across the court. Mara Vale threw herself in front of bullets meant for a stranger. She did not know who I was, did not care about power or immortality, or any of the things you have spent centuries pursuing. She just saw someone about to die and decided her life was worth trading. He turned to look at Mara, and his expression softened in ways that made the ancient vampires shift uncomfortably. That kind of courage, that kind of selfless, foolish human courage, is what I have been missing, what we have all been missing. He looked back at the court. We have become so focused on survival that we have forgotten what makes survival worthwhile. Pretty words, someone called from the shadows, but they do not change what she is, an anomaly, a threat to the natural order. Then let the natural order change. Lucien's voice turned to iron. I am not asking your permission. I am telling you how this will be. Mara Vale stands beside me. Under my protection, part of my reign. Anyone who harms her faces me. Anyone who threatens her faces my full wrath. His eyes blazed crimson. And after tonight, you all know exactly what that means. Silence filled the hall. Then Casimir stepped forward, ancient and weathered, and bent one knee. The king has spoken. Others followed, slowly at first, then faster. Not all of them. Some left rather than bend, and Mara knew they would become future problems. But enough. More than enough. Lucien had held his throne, and he had done it with a mortal woman at his side. Later, on the balcony of her apartment, their apartment now, in any way that mattered, Mara stood watching the city transform under starlight. Do you regret it? Lucien asked quietly, appearing beside her as he always did. The choice you made that night? Mara thought about that moment in Russos. The split second between seeing the gun and throwing herself forward, how her body had moved before her brain could argue. No, she said, I'm the person who jumps, remember? Even when it's stupid, even when it costs everything. It did cost everything. His voice carried centuries of regret. Your old life, your humanity, your safety. It also gave me something. She turned to face him. This ancient king who had remade himself for her. Purpose, power, a reason to be brave instead of just desperate. And was it worth it? The question came out vulnerable, uncertain, nothing like the vampire king who had just faced down his court. Mara reached out, took his cold hand in her warmer one. They were learning each other's temperatures now, learning to find comfort in the differences. Ask me again in 100 years, she said. Lucien's laugh was surprised and genuine. 100 years. You think we'll last that long? I think, Mara said, squeezing his hand, that I jumped into your fate once. Might as well see where it lands. Below them the city glittered with new awareness. The vampire king had changed. His reign had evolved, and at the center of it all was a woman who had chosen courage over survival. In the shadows between buildings, things watched and waited. Morgana's supporters, future challenges, new threats that would test this fragile balance they created. But for now, in this moment, Mara Vale stood beside Lucien Crowe and felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The woman who jumped, Lucien said softly, as if testing how the words tasted. That's what they're calling you in the court. Better than the waitress, Mara said. Much better. He turned to face her fully, his expression holding things he still couldn't quite voice. Thank you, Mara, for jumping, for staying, for being exactly who you are. She smiled, fierce and real. Thank you for catching me. The dawn was coming, and with it, whatever new challenges their combined fate would bring, but they would face it together. A king and the woman who had saved him, the woman who had jumped. And that's where we leave Mara and Lucien standing together, facing whatever comes next. But I want to know what you thought. Did this story wreck you like it wrecked me? Are you thinking about that moment she jumped? That choice that changed everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. I read every single one and I love hearing what resonated with you. And here's the important part. If you love the story, if you're craving more tales of impossible love and dangerous devotion, you need to subscribe immediately because tomorrow I'm bringing you something completely different, but equally consuming. A new story, new characters, same level of intensity that will have you hooked from the first line. Don't miss it. Hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and tell me where you're watching from. Are you in New York, London, Mumbai, Sydney? I want to know where my story family calls home. Thank you for spending this time with Mara and Lucien tonight. Tomorrow we dive into another world together. I'll see you then. Sweet dreams, or should I say, dark dreams.